The film begins with a bleak vision of an apocalyptic Earth, devastated by a climate change pandemic and war. When Earth became uninhabitable, the ruling elite class fled and settled on Kepler in 2009. 2 generations later, a project called Ulysse was launched to investigate whether it was possible to return to Earth. Unfortunately, the first team to return to Earth was lost soon after landing. At the start of the film, we see a shuttle carrying scientists, known as Ulysses 2, which continued the research program after the first one failed. The shuttle has a rocky when it lands in what appears to be the ocean. It begins to sink, but before it completely submerges, the doors are opened, and the researchers swim out, after being pushed around by the waves all night. Blake wakes up on the beach, coughing and spitting out water. She notices her lost mate a short distance away, and crawls towards her, to make sure she is okay, but she discovers that her partner has died at a distance. She notices that the waves have pushed the shuttle out onto the beach as well. She makes her way to it and discovers Tucker unconscious, after waking him up. They talk about how they only have 6 hours before the waves return, so they need to finish their reports before that. Tucker tries to get up, but his leg has been badly injured as a result of the harsh landing. Thus, they decide that Blake should conduct the first recon alone. Blake starts walking, taking in the barren landscape. Miles could only see that the wet sandy shore comes into contact with living creatures, which surprises her. Abruptly, the atmosphere becomes hazy, and Tucker cautions Blake about the spike in humidity, indicating a significant environmental shift. Blake, struggling with decreased visibility, instructs Tucker to utilize a flare gun to guide her back to their base. Despite the challenging conditions caused by the thick fog, Blake hastens towards their shelter. Meanwhile, Tucker becomes aware of unfamiliar sounds outside, and senses the presence of an unknown individual. As he prepares another flare gun, a figure cloaked in a robe stealthily enters the shuttle through a different entrance. After firing the flare gun at the intruder, which made contact with his face, the assailant continued to attack Tucker with a spear. Upon reaching their base, Blake discovered that the shuttle had been moved. Perplexed, she followed the trail and observed numerous individuals in the distance. While attempting to get a closer look through her gun's binoculars, she was suddenly overwhelmed by shadowy figures and struck in the head. Upon regaining consciousness, Blake found herself with a bag over her head, and was forced towards a deep well, filled with water. Observing her surroundings, she notices Tucker leaning against the wall, his shoulders visibly bleeding. As the doors open, a rope descends, and Blake emerges from the well to find a group of natives. They escort her to a man with burnt cheeks, a result of Tucker's earlier actions. Realizing the man needs medical attention, Blake attempts to communicate her need for her medical equipment, only to be understood by one native. After providing aid to the injured man, she was returned to the well with a companion by the natives. Blake observes Tucker's weakened state due to blood loss. She becomes enthused to inform him about the existence of a thriving community comprising children. Despite the destruction caused by the natives on their pod, Blake insists on returning to report the situation. Tucker, acknowledging his hindrance in their journey, hands over the device around his neck, and advises her to locate the Bimer from the previous Ulysses. This device would enable her to transmit a signal notifying others that Earth is once again habitable. As Tucker's life slips away, Blake experiences a poignant flashback to her childhood. In this recollection, her father, who was a passenger on the inaugural Ulysses mission, stresses the importance of saving the human race. She begs him to remain while she devises a strategy. Suddenly, water begins to rush in, causing the well-being chambers to fill up. She ascends and calls out for assistance. The man she previously aided with burns opens the trapdoor, allowing her to escape. The land appears to be flooded, prompting the natives to use metal rafts to avoid drowning. Once safely aboard the rafts, the natives retrieve Tucker's body, and respectfully send it off on a smaller raft. Meanwhile, Black is held back from the community and observes as they gather around a fire. On the other side, she witnesses couples engaging in intimate activities. Her thoughts take her back to the moment when her father taught her about Earth. He narrated the finding of a potentially momentous breakthrough, assuring her that if it proved true, he would deliver it to her the next morning, leading the indigenous inhabitants to rouse Blake and return her to her proper role in society. As the children attempted to provoke her with water, Blake observed the tools required to send a signal to their base. One of the children, named Mila, appeared to show compassion towards her and dropped the healing spray. Blake sought to enlist the help of the child to retrieve the case. Suddenly, the indigenous people opened the hatch door and lowered young girls, including a baby, into the well. The sound of gunfire echoed in the vicinity. She climbs up to see what has occurred. Blake witnesses a group of intruders raiding their small community. It appears that they take a large number of youngsters, including Mila. After everything was finished, a woman tossed a rope down the well. She then began sprinting around in search of any survivors, but came up empty-handed. They crawled out of the well and glanced around to find the small community destroyed. The village leader, who appears to be the only one who has survived outside, was calling Mila's name and hunting for her. Blake begins to pursue the woman and asks her who those people were. The leader inquires of Blake the reason for her presence, to which Blake responds with a desire to assist. While she elaborates on her intentions, the woman begins to scavenge for sustenance as Blake refills her water container. Suddenly, in the distance, the sound of cries prompts them to investigate. They observe from a concealed vantage point as the raiders compel their captives onto a large raft in a frantic attempt to rescue a child. The woman brandishes a flare gun in an effort to deter them, prompting Blake to suggest a diversion tactic to facilitate the rescue of the captives. Subduing the woman, Blake takes it upon herself to execute the mission. Stealthily infiltrating the ship, she proceeds to assess the situation. She notices her equipment entangled in a net and moves to retrieve it, only to be surprised as the boat abruptly resumes its journey. Reacting swiftly, she descends into the hold where the passengers are being held captive, and assumes the guise of one of them. After some time at sea, the vessel halts, and the captors begin to transfer the prisoners onto a larger ship, subjecting them to unnecessary roughness. In an effort to avoid drawing attention to herself, Blake keeps her head down. The leader of the group arrives, and carefully inspects each newcomer, selecting a few for further scrutiny by his associates. Maya was among their ranks. The leader then retrieves the weapon discovered in their possession and inquiries about its owner, turning his attention towards Blake. He proceeds to remove her cap. Subsequently, the man escorts Blake upstairs to a secluded area. Upon reaching a specific room, he instructs her to halt and remove her cap. After conducting a search, he grants her entry into the room. Few moments later, a man emerges from the adjoining chamber, displaying excitement upon seeing her. He introduces himself as Gibson and inquires if she has made contact with Kepler. Blake confesses that she has not, due to the damage sustained by the pod. She informs Gibson of her need for the old pod to transmit a signal, but regrettably, he informs her of its destruction. He informed her that, following an extended period of immersion with the indigenous population, and establishing a bond with them, they unexpectedly launched an attack, just as they were preparing to submit their final report. He informed Blake that her father and their colleague had tragically lost their lives in the altercation. Gibson explained that her father had been constructing a dam, with the dual purpose of water containment and hydroelectric power generation. Expressing his satisfaction at her presence, Gibson assigned her a sleeping quarter. Blake drifted off to a recollection of her father in the morning, and upon freshening up and changing attire, Gibson escorted her to a classroom brimming with children. They performed a brief musical performance, and eagerly engaged her in a discussion about the renowned astronomer Kepler. During her exploration of the spacecraft, Blake encounters Gibson's adopted son, who shares a tale reminiscent of her late father's fond reminiscences about trees. Curious about the source of the story, she learns that it originated from a neighbor residing near the engine room. Despite the child's reluctance to lead her there, Blake clandestinely ventures to the engine room, only to discover her father imprisoned. Gibson then appears, admitting to deceiving her and revealing that her father instigated the uprising out of love for a native inhabitant. She pleads with him to open the door for her once she embraces her father. Accusing him of betrayal, she berates him for their ill-fated return, fueling Kepler's anger towards her father. Blake retreats from his room to the balcony. Gibson and Blake engage in a conversation about utilizing the weather transmitter to contact Kepler. Later, Gibson, accompanied by his family and Baker, gathers around the dinner table when news of an intrusion interrupts their meal. To their surprise, it is revealed that Mila's mother attempted to rescue her, but was apprehended and confined to Gibson's private quarters. Blake questions why the education provided is exclusively for girls. He informs her that individuals from Kepler must help repopulate the Earth when they arrive here. He instructs her and Parling to return to the small village in search of the biometer. Blake inquires about the native woman who intervened to save her daughter, only to learn that she was scheduled for execution the next day. This revelation causes Blake to question the validity of their mission. Returning to her cabin, Blake discovers Mila hiding inside. During their conversation, Parling arrives at her door, stating he needs to search the cabin as one of the girls has gone missing. Parling attempts to assault her, but she ultimately thwarts his advances by administering a lethal poison. Together, Mila and Blake scour the ship and locate her mother. Blake releases her and liberates as many prisoners as possible. Blake rushes to rescue her father, after learning that Gibson possesses evidence that could potentially revolutionize reproduction on Earth. Together, they come to the realization that they must prevent Gibson from sharing this information. Despite facing gunfire, Blake and her companions manage to flee the ship and make their way towards the weather transmitter, where Blake takes it upon herself to prevent Gibson from making contact. Blake is on the verge of shooting Gibson when he points a gun at Neil's head, revealing that the child is actually her brother. He threatens to shoot him unless Neil surrenders her weapon. Despite her mother's attempts to intervene, Gibson shoots her and continues to intimidate Blake. Fearing for her brother's safety, Neil reluctantly drops the gun. Mila's mother intervenes to rescue her daughter, leading them back to safety on the boat. The film concludes with the community reunited and out of danger, this bringing closure to the story. Thanks for watching, take care, and bye now. See you in the next video.